Thank you for joining us today for the Conform to Christ podcast, where we seek to engage the mind, affect the heart, and call people to follow Christ. My name is George Mays. I'm here with Jay Jones, and this is Text Driven Tuesday.
Morning.
Yep.
How's it going?
It's going all right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Good. You got a couple weeks or a week, and you're going on vacation.
Yes.
Nice.
Yep.
Feeling nice for you and your wife to have a little time for your anniversary.
Yeah, our anniversary is at the end of the month, but our fall break is at the beginning of the month. So
Is this 21, 22?
20.
20.
Yep.
Okay, awesome. It's a nice little milestone for you.
So take a little vacation.
Yeah.
Get out of the state.
Yeah?
Yep. Turn my phone off.
That'll be nice. Turn that phone off. When we went to Colorado, that's the best part. Not having cell phone service.
Yeah.
No looking at Facebook, no looking at Twitter, not seeing the news. Like, I didn't even know what was going on in the world.
Yeah.
Was there an attack on the homeland? I had no idea. And it was actually incredible.
Yeah.
It's a little taste of living back in the 90s where we had endless information bombarding us.
I know. I feel like, and I've talked to people about this, I feel like the reason why so many people are suffering with anxiety and depression, just sad, on edge, angry,
Yeah.
I think it's because of this little thing.
Yeah.
And I don't think we were created to carry the weight of the world.
Yeah, to literally know what's going on in every corner of the earth.
Right.
Just to know what's going around you with your neighbors.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds like heaven.
Yeah. So if you are feeling anxious or angry or sad, maybe just turn your phone off for a little bit.
Yeah.
Don't be on Facebook.
Yeah.
The world will carry on without you.
Yeah,
You do
absolutely.
you do not have to know everything that's going on.
That's why I love Ecclesiastes. I always tell you, George, you're not having a great day. Just remember, when you die, no one's going to remember
That's
you
true.
anyways.
That's the encouragement you gave me last week.
Yeah. Just remember, George, your life is so insignificant that your great-grandkids won't even know who you are or anything you did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can always count on you when I'm having a bad day. Just remember, you'll die.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a good pick-me-up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, it seems to work, no? It's counterintuitive.
Mm-hmm.
Think about how, in the long run, how all of your problems are pretty insignificant.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we can joke about it, but Solomon, he says it's better to go into the house of mourning than into the house of feasting.
Yeah.
Like, everyone's so caught up in living their best life now and hedonism, just trying to squeeze every bit of pleasure out of right now. That's just not what we're made for.
Yeah.
It leaves you empty. It leaves you empty, and so you feel it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm guilty of that.
Mhm.
I'm guilty of not thinking about ultimate meaning, ultimate reality.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a Monday morning, if you couldn't tell. Talking about death and sadness and.
Well, it's Monday morning, and we're just sad because it's so long to get back to Sunday.
Yeah, we had a great Sunday. It was
Yeah.
it was a fantastic Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, great Lord's Day morning service, and then here at Christ Fellowship Church last night we had a hymn sing.
Yeah, we sang for like an hour and 15,
Mm-hmm.
and when I got home, and it was Angie and Brooke, we were all like hoarse, like our voices were gone.
Yeah,
we sang our voices away.
You gotta sing more, Jay.
Yeah,
Gotta exercise
Well,
those vocal cords.
hey, I did also teach for 2 hours.
That's true.
And I sing during church. I'm one of those crazy pastors
Yeah.
that sings with the
You
congregation.
don't stay back in the green room
No.
till they call your name.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's back today.
Yeah.
So that's good. Yeah.
It's such a blessing to have a church that sings.
Mm-hmm.
The men sing.
Yeah, they
Like
do.
you can hear the people singing, the kids sing,
Mhm.
and we sing good songs. We sing good theology, but we also sing songs that are put to good music,
Yeah.
and that's a blessing.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Yeah.
Pumps me up too. I don't know about you. When you get ready to preach, you can hear everybody singing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. You just like pump that. That's a performance enhancer right there.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Pump it right into my veins.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. What do you want to talk about, Jay?
I don't know. I mean, you probably want to talk about Steve Lawson. We'll have an opportunity in the text, I think, to maybe talk about that too.
Yeah, we probably want to talk about it a
So-
little bit. There's probably people in the church that want to. I'm still trying to process it.
Well, yeah. I think the biggest travesty of it is he's like 70 years old.
73.
Yeah, and for me, like when we talk about like magnitude of travesty,
Mm-hmm.
his wife is probably destroyed. I don't see a lot of people talking about her, but
So let's back up and let's say what's going on, so we're not just dancing around. There may be people that don't know.
first
if you're not on social media, you're probably not going to know stuff like this.
Well, I think the first thing we should say is we need to like examine our own hearts and how much of that we want to know about stuff because
Right.
we're secret gossipers,
Mm. Yeah.
right? I don't feel entitled to know a lot about this,
Mhm.
but since it's public, and I mean he's a lot of people's hero, right or wrong. People have heroes
Right.
they look up to because maybe he's really influenced them, and I'm sure a lot of people that listen were influenced by him. I got text messages from my adult children about this.
Yeah.
I mean, Steve Lawson sent it was public, but personal,
Oh yeah. I
personal
remember
message
that. Yeah.
to my kid.
Right. I remember that.
Remember that?
Yeah.
To Drake.
Yeah. So Thursday, right after we got done recording our free for all,
Yeah, we were already done.
like we were done. You went to do the uploading stuff,
Mhm.
trying to get everything ready to publish it, and I sit over here and just see what's going on,
Mm-hmm.
and it was all over the place.
Right.
What's the name of his church?
Trinity
Bible Church in Texas.
Yeah, in
Right.
Dallas.
They had published an open letter saying that Steve Lawson had. I think he actually went to the elders. I think.
It's so unclear whether
Yeah.
they went to him or he went to them.
But
It's not a lot we don't know.
Yeah, but anyway, he confessed to having an inappropriate relationship with a woman.
That's what they said. That's all they said. Yeah.
That's all they said. That's all we know. And they immediately
Removed him.
fired him. I
Yeah.
guess. I guess that's how you would. Yeah, they removed him. His
Indefinitely.
indefinitely.
So
Yeah.
that forever. He's not ever coming back.
His the next day, One Passion, which is his ministry, everything was gone except for an announcement on their page, saying basically the same thing.
Yeah.
Um,
I got an email Friday from the Master's Seminary because he's the dean, the
Mhm.
head of the doctor program,
they had a conference.
and they removed him from everything.
Yeah, Men of the Word.
Mm.
It was supposed to be him and H.B. Charles and someone else. Anyway, I watched the announcement that they gave at the conference. Austin Duncan, is that his name?
Mhm.
Yeah, he announced it. So that's the big news that's just rocked
Right.
the evangelical world,
Mhm.
at least here in America. And I imagine other places. I saw a comment from a guy in Africa. He was like, we don't have like Bible teachers, and Steve Lawson was a huge influence. And yeah, so it's I was shocked when I read it. I was like, this has got to be like, what day is this? This isn't April. Like I was like, what is this? This is on the level of seeing something like this from like Paul Washer.
Right.
If I saw something from Paul Washer, I'd be like, there's no way this is real. Like, this has been hacked or something.
Right.
But no, this is real.
Yeah. Yeah.
and it was shocking. I'm still trying to, even as I was sitting in the church service yesterday, I was just thinking about it.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm not even like a Steve Lawson fanboy. Like I've listened to a handful of his sermons,
Mm-hmm.
read a couple of his books, but they were church history.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's just shocking.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's you know, you think about it on a whole bunch of different levels. Like I said, like his family, he has adult kids.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's 70, so his kids got to be in their 40s. Um, I think he has sons. I'm not sure if he has a daughter, but think about his wife. I mean, married that long, this happened. Awful. Feel
Yep.
terrible for her,
Yep.
his kids, the church,
Mm-hmm.
and then so the local church, man,
Yep.
terrible, and then the broader church, just everyone that he has also influenced. And one of the biggest travesties of it, I think, outside of the harm to his own wife, which does upset me, is the reproach to the gospel and how it caused other people to stumble in their faith.
Right.
You know, Jesus says it'd be better for you to tie a millstone around your neck and be thrown into the sea than to cause one of these little ones of mine to stumble. People interpret that incorrectly a lot. I don't think they understand the way Jesus uses that as a term of endearment for his disciples. We often apply that to children, which you obviously can, but that is probably one of the biggest. And you can see it now online, the reproach that has been brought to the gospel and how it's given people ammunition to use against not just the gospel, but to the Reformed faith.
Yeah.
You know, I talked to Drake on the phone, and I was like, what happened? Did it cause you to have doubts in your faith? And he said, no, it didn't. But you have to think that it kind of probably did.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If somebody like him,
Right.
like what it just causes you to think, like, is this all real? You know what I mean? Like it can cause people to really stumble in their faith.
Right.
And so I just told him what I've always told him. You know, this is true. And I've told him since I was little. If something happens to me when I grow up and I apostatize, and your mom does, and everyone you know does, this is all still true.
Right.
It's all true. It does not depend on who we are and our faithfulness as humans.
Yeah.
So
it's hard. I mean, you've got Steve Lawson, but you know, several years ago, Ravi Zacharias, stuff came out about him. I'm not a Tony Evans fan, but Tony Evans, same thing happened to him. He stepped down because of some inappropriate relationship, and it should remind us first, like you said, the gospel is true no matter what men do, and we need to be careful not to elevate these teachers. Even though you see them everywhere, they've got a big platform, big ministry. They go to conferences, they write blogs. You see their sermons on YouTube and Facebook, and it's hard. It's hard not to elevate these guys.
yeah.
I mean, I can't even imagine. I mean, can you imagine the devastation if someone like MacArthur or R.C. Sproul or John Piper, like something like this happened?
Yeah.
I mean, it would just be absolutely horrendous. Right. And it's partly our fault for elevating people and thinking of them as higher than we should. Like they're just guys. I mean, at the end of the day, they're just guys.
Right.
God has just providentially given them a bigger platform, so they have a responsibility there. But we have a responsibility not to elevate them.
Right.
But then a lot of just personal reflection. Just heart searching. Like, if this could happen to someone like Steve Lawson, why do I think that I'm untouchable? Why do I think that I'm not that I'm somehow exempt from this temptation? And so it's God, I hope, will use this to strengthen ministers as they see this and they there's like a rededication of personal integrity and purity and pursuing holiness, but also churches. Like this is a call for churches to pray for their pastors.
Yeah.
Like that is not just that's not a like a surface level request. This isn't just some nice platitude. Pray for your pastors
Mm-hmm.
and pray for them specifically that they will remain holy and pure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's and maybe encourage people to not want to know every detail about what happened.
Yeah.
Like and when it first came out, I was like, he needs to release a public statement because his ministry is public. But I mean, there was a public statement, right, from the church.
Yeah,
So-
they didn't hide it. They didn't. There's no cover up. Now people will be like, it is covered up because we're living in this time when, like, anytime something like this happens, it's got to be some kind of abuse.
Yeah,
Like,
and he's
this is we don't immediately want to have like evil suspicions that this is like our mind will immediately jump to like the worst possible scenario. The church is autonomous.
Mhm.
And they are not covering it up. They've released a statement.
And he's removed indefinitely, meaning like in other streams of, I feel like in evangelicalism, a pastor can do something like this and come back.
Yeah.
There's no coming back in the Reformed world.
Right.
Like every ministry he's been involved with, I mean, the one I got from TMS is like he's done
Mm.
for good.
Yeah.
Like he may repent and hope like go through church discipline through his church
Right.
and go through that process and be restored to fellowship in a local church, but he's never returning to ministry.
Mm.
It's over.
Yeah.
He's disqualified himself.
Right.
That's not covering it up. That's not making light of it.
Right.
If you lose your ministry for life,
Mm-hmm.
right, that's like a ministerial death sentence.
Right.
But it's not saying it can't be forgiven. Also, the things to consider as I was thinking about this, they're supposed to be a Baptist congregation, whether they function as a congregation or not. What should happen, this is just me from the outside, I think everything should be told to just the local congregation by the elders. They should handle this church discipline process, so they should know everything.
Yeah.
I don't know that the rest of the world needs to know everything.
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, if you wade into the comment sections, which you shouldn't, you'll see people like they need to tell us everything.
Right.
Like we're not. He's not. We can't do church discipline on him.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Like he's not our pastor.
Right.
We're not his congregation. I think the level of just making it public in just general terms and then him being removed from everything, I think that's all that we should expect.
Mhm.
I don't think that I think anything beyond that is us being nosy.
Right.
And,
Yeah, Brick asked-
and looking in the stuff that it's none of our business. Like we are like the tabloid generation. We
Right.
want to know all the dirty details of everyone's life, and that's sinful on our part.
Right. Yeah. It would be good. I mean, Brick asked me, she's like, what would you do if it was you? And I thought about it. You know, I don't know. I'm not saying he should do this. He's going to have to figure it out himself. But because so many people did care about him and really look up to him publicly saying, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I did sin, and I'm sorry that I hurt people all over the world would probably be helpful.
Yeah. But again, this just came out Thursday. I mean, we're not even a week into the announcement. So, I mean, demanding someone to just the next day,
yeah, and
like that stinks more of politics than actual repentance. I think giving people time.
and if you're like super hurt, like this has been catastrophic for you, that might reveal something more about you. That like you said, you've elevated a person to a place where he shouldn't be.
Yeah.
Like people falling should not devastate our faith
Mm-hmm.
to where like we're in danger of deconstructing because
Right.
our people we looked up to failed. And,
Right.
even fell into grievous sins. But it is
If we just laid out a list of people that have disappointed us in like the evangelical world, and that are faced with writing on that, it's all over.
well. I told you, like the only people like whenever I was after I was converted, and I was born again, and it was a process of me kind of like discovering Reformed guys that were influential to me. But the only people standing that are left are John Piper and John MacArthur that are still alive. I mean, Washer a little bit, but he hasn't. I haven't really interacted with a lot of Paul Washer stuff. Just heard a few of his sermons that are. He obviously is very gifted, but that's it. Piper's left, MacArthur's left, Sproul died, and my local pastor from Kansas City. Like he is as good a preacher as all of these people, but you've never heard of him.
Right.
Right. It kind of maybe should tell you why you shouldn't elevate people to this high place
Right.
where you think they walk on water. Because
Yeah.
there are people you've never heard of that are just as talented and good as them. So that's it. I mean, you got like 8 people that let me down. That, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So, disappointing, obviously, but think about the regular men around you.
Yeah.
That haven't let you down. Like my own dad. You know what I mean?
Right.
They're like, maybe look up to regular people more than you look up to these people, and it'll kind of protect you from being uber disappointed and running your week.
Yeah.
You know?
And just keeping a close eye on your life.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure.
So I saw one, and it was a woman. I don't know who she was. It was on Twitter, and she was immediately saying that it was abuse. And she obviously, the way she was structuring the whole argument was from the critical theory,
Right.
power dynamics, and all of this stuff, and
But we don't know. It's pure speculation.
right.
Because, like, what if it's not? Like, what if it was a CEO, a woman, a CEO of a Fortune 500 company?
Yeah.
Then, like, is he now the victim?
And a lot of
she's powerful.
Yeah, but
You
a
know,
lot of the
it's
comments,
dumb.
I'm becoming increasingly convinced that people do not really think that there's a devil.
Yeah.
I think he's like this idea,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't really think that there are personal entities, like intelligent beings that hate Christians, and they are actively working against the church.
Mm-hmm.
That should be a sober reminder to us. Peter tells us that the devil is like a roaring lion, that he prowls around looking for someone to devour. And if we're immediately like, this is not, it's not spiritual. Like guys like Steve Lawson, they have to take personal responsibility for what they're doing. The devil's not making them do it.
Right.
But there are entities that are working against us.
And don't be so naive to think it's only in the fall itself.
Yeah.
Like, they've been at it a while. And in the aftermath is where a lot of the work is done. Mm-hmm. Right. In the trying to attack and harm people's faith, trying to pull people into like a spirit of gossip and wanting to know detail and wanting to talk about it with other people. So don't be like naive and think that there's maybe not a trap laid for me in this whole process.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. The depths of depravity and the threat of the devil and his angels, it's all real.
Right.
We don't need to act like this happened a long time ago. It doesn't happen anymore.
Well, I think pretty sobering, but I'm going to go out on a limb and just be as gracious as I can toward him and say his whole life was lived up to this point, hopefully in faithfulness, and he probably never thought it would happen to him either.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but we don't know. There's so much that we don't know. We don't need to speculate about. It's terrible. and it's awful, the damage that has been done. But he may be restored to Christian fellowship and repent, and we should rejoice if he does that. He'll never return to ministry. He'll never return to a preaching ministry, ever. So I think, but the world is ruthless, right? Like, they want a public crucifixion. That's what they want, and they won't be satisfied with anything less than that.
Right. Yep. All right. Well, let it be a reminder and a warning to all of us. Well, we are in Romans chapter 3 this morning. That's what you preached on Sunday morning. We are in chapter 3, verses 1 through 8. So if you want to grab a Bible and follow along, you can. We'll throw it up on the screen, and we'll walk through it today. You started by reminding us of this is really like a courtroom.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is Paul, the prosecuting attorney, and the Jews and the Gentiles are on trial.
Right.
And so he's already gone after the Gentiles, and the Jews are like putting themselves in the jury.
Right.
They're like, yeah, let them have it.
Yeah.
We already know they're guilty. And then he turns on them.
Mm-hmm.
He turns on the Jews, and he is now accusing them. And now he is. You use the opening illustration of objections, objections in the courtroom,
right?
And how an objection can change the whole course of the argument, right? The whole case can stand or fall on objections, right? And so, as Paul is going to do throughout the book of Romans, he's going to be presenting objections, probably that he's familiar with, that he's heard.
Right. Yeah, that he encounters.
Yeah. And we're going to encounter objections.
Yeah.
To the gospel. And so this is a helpful passage to Paul is showing us how to engage in those objections. He's not just raising them and answering them to show the condemnation of the Jews, but he's also we also can use this as here's some ways that we can answer objections also, because we're called. Peter says in 1 Peter to always have an answer, right, for those that question the hope that we have within us. And so we're going to be looking at two objections and Paul's answers to them today.
Yeah. Yep. So here we go in chapter 3, beginning verse 1. Then what advantage has the Jew, or what is the value of circumcision? Much in every way. To begin with, the Jews were entrusted with the oracles of God. What if some were unfaithful? Does their unfaithfulness nullify the faithfulness of God? By no means. Let God be true, though everyone were a liar, as it is written, that you may be justified in your words and prevail when you are judged. But if our unrighteousness serves to show the righteousness of God... Hang on. I got distracted by a text. But if our unrighteousness serves to show the righteousness of God, what shall we say? That God is unrighteous to inflict wrath on us? I speak in a human way. By no means. For then how could God judge the world? But if through my lie God's truth abounds to his glory, why am I still being condemned as a sinner? And why not do evil that good may come? As some people slanderously charge us with saying, their condemnation is just.
All right, so two objections to the gospel and Paul's answers. So two objections, two answers. And I was talking to someone after the service, and they were commenting that these are really weird objections. These are really weird.
Yeah.
Like, is this what they're really saying?
Yeah.
And so hopefully this will help us to bring some clarity to this for people that haven't heard the sermon. I think you did a good job of explaining the text. So let's see what we can do in our discussion. So we've got two objections. So there's your outline, two objections. The first objection is found in verses 1 through 4. If your gospel is true, then God is not faithful to his people.
Yeah. Yeah. So the maybe I'll just kind of summarize how it goes, and then we'll get into the details of how this objection is raised. But the objection is, okay, you have just shown that when it comes to salvation, so soteriologically, to use our fancy words,
Right.
there is no advantage that a Jew has to the Gentile, that a Gentile may by faith in the work of the Spirit receive true circumcision. That's the language he uses, very inflammatory language for a Jew to hear, right? They are the elect of God. God has chosen them from all peoples of the earth, and now you just told me that a Gentile can be saved just like I can, irrespective to the law. The law brings nothing into this, but I am still holding on to this idea. God chose us. He didn't choose the Gentiles. But if your gospel's true, then we have no advantage whatsoever, right? So, and looking around in Paul's time, you could see that not many Jews are believing this. So that raises the question about the unfaithfulness.
Right.
Right. What if some were unfaithful? Does that mean God is unfaithful? Because he's made promises to us all through the Old Testament that he will save us from our sins. But here we are, and you're saying, you're preaching this gospel. And look, the majority of Jews don't believe it. And so that's what's going on here in the background of this first argument.
And he's introducing it here, and he's answering it here, but he's going to give a fuller explanation in 9 through 11. Right.
Yeah, he will. And then the second objection, we get more of that in chapter 6. So he raises it. It brings up their objection. Is there an advantage then? Then what of our advantage? And you expect him to say, you don't have one. But you have to remember the categories he's speaking of. When it comes to how someone will escape the judgment of God and be justified before God, there's not an advantage. But according to Paul, there still is a major advantage.
Right.
And that's how he answers the question about God's faithfulness. Has God really been faithful to his people? Do they actually really have an advantage? And he answers, yes, much in every way. They have a huge advantage.
Right.
And so that's the first one. And he tells you to begin with, and you expect a list, but the list doesn't really come until chapter 9.
Right.
It's like he just says, yeah, I've got more, but let me give you probably the most important one. And it is that the Jews have been entrusted with the oracles of God.
And that really encapsulates all the advantages that they have, because the oracles are revelation. They have special revelation.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They have revelation that the Gentiles don't have.
Yeah. So kind of I was trying to think of a phrase to capture the advantage, and I think the advantage is an advantage of proximity. How close are you to God, what God has revealed in a special way? So how close are you to the Scriptures? The closer you are to the Scriptures, the more advantage you have over someone else. And so the Jew in Paul's day has more advantage than anybody alive on planet Earth.
Right.
And that's what he gets at.
Right. So they've got you gave a list of 5 things. I started listing them as you were saying it, and I thought you had 6, but
yeah, we could even think of more. I'm sure.
Yeah,
we could think of more.
So they have the promise of the Savior. So they have the announcement going all the way back to Genesis 3 that a Savior is coming, and so they should be anticipating him coming.
Right. Yeah.
So that their whole history and all of the oracles of God have an endpoint that they should be anticipating.
And they are still anticipating that promise coming. And the problem is, as you see in Jesus, as he is encountering and ministering, they're looking for a revolutionary who will bring the sword,
right,
and warfare and human liberation that way, because they have the comings wrong.
Right.
They weren't anticipating the type of Messiah he would be in his first coming.
And that's because they're ignoring some of the other oracles,
Mhm.
right? So they also have the covenants, which are really the backbone of the scriptures,
right?
And they're like the turning points of the narrative in the Old Testament that take us to another step closer to the Messiah. Like here's another revelation, a major revelation of what this Messiah is going to be.
Right.
And in the covenants is the law, and encompassed in the law is the sacrificial system
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
with the tabernacle and later the temple and the Levitical priest and the animal sacrifices and all of the rituals, and all of those things are meant to tell them something about what this coming Savior is going to be like,
Mm-hmm.
if they're paying attention.
Right. Yeah.
And then they've got the prophets
Mm-hmm.
who are really giving commentary
Mm-hmm.
to their history,
Right.
and giving commentary on the sacrificial system.
Right.
Like they're telling them what the sacrificial system is ultimately about. Then they've got typology,
Mm-hmm.
and that is these persons and places and events and institutions that God has providentially intended for to be foreshadowing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And if you pay attention to the way that the Old Testament authors are commenting on earlier stuff, they're picking up on the pattern.
Mm-hmm.
They're picking up on the fact that these events they're historical, but they also are instructional.
Right.
They're educational,
Right.
and they repeat.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if you pay attention to the Old Testament, if you pay attention to the stories, you'll see this repeating pattern. And if they're paying attention, they should be picking up on this is what we're looking for.
Right.
And David does this.
Mm-hmm.
He recognizes in himself that he's part of the pattern. And so, what is his greater son going to be like?
Mm-hmm.
Well, he sees him as the fulfillment of the pattern.
Right.
And then the idea that they're not going to be saved by the law;
Mm-hmm.
they have to be saved by grace.
Right. Yeah. The whole Old Testament testifies to the fact that the law is insufficient to deal with human sin,
Mm-hmm.
but it also testifies to this truthfulness, which is the main argument against the gospel. It testifies that despite human unfaithfulness and their failure in sin, that God forgives sin by grace and mercy, right? He does it throughout the whole Old Testament, people that don't deserve it. So they should be already prepared and looking for a coming of this Messiah, this promised one, that all of the types and shadows, all of the covenants point forward to, and this idea that there is a God who saves sinners based on grace and mercy, and that the law can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
But the accusation that they're throwing at the gospel is that if the gospel is true and the Gentiles can be saved just like we can in the same way exactly, then God hasn't been faithful to his people. Because, look, all of his people aren't saved. And it's a very strong negation, right?
This is such a weird. It's a weird objection. Do they believe that just by being a Jew they're saved?
Yes.
That's wild, isn't it?
And they believe that today,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's numerous writings. I think we discussed this last time
Mm-hmm.
in the traditions that emerged after the destruction of the temple, and that believe that if you are a Jew and you are circumcised, you will not face judgment.
What would they do with someone like King Ahab or King Manasseh?
I don't
Like
know.
you've got wicked guys.
Right.
You're not looking at outside the Jewish community. I mean, you're looking at actual Jewish people
Mm-hmm.
who are extraordinarily wicked.
Right. Yeah. So that's the accusation,
Mm.
right? God's not faithful. And the answer is very
Are they
strong.
universalist in a Jewish sense? Like, yes, they are wicked. Yes, God judges them,
Right.
but there is, because of God's promises, his faithfulness to the covenants, that somehow they'll be redeemed.
Yeah, I think as long as they had the intent to keep the law, right? I think that's what they're banking on.
Yeah.
Because they're about external realities. So if you can show an adherence to the law and that you are attempting to follow God's law,
Yeah.
that you will be okay on the day of judgment. Now, everything we've talked about in chapter 2 really already negated that.
Right.
He's already showed that they're guilty.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the accusation. Well, what if some are unfaithful? He really undersells it because it's like the majority according to like this argument about the gospel and them not being saved. What if some are unfaithful? Well, almost all of them are. So does their unfaithfulness nullify God's faithfulness? Does that mean God's been unfaithful to his people if they're not receiving what you are saying is the culmination of the whole Old Testament? And he says, by no means. Like, absolutely not. It's the strongest negation in Greek. He does it twice in this section. And the answer he gives, I think we should really think about. He says, let God be true, though everyone were a liar. So it's like he's saying, he doesn't explicitly say it, but it's like he's saying, God is faithful, even if every Jew that ever lives does not accept this gospel. Because the gospel itself, not just the whole Old Testament demonstrates this faithfulness of God to people who are not faithful to him, but the gospel itself is the demonstration of God's faithfulness. And they're rejecting God's faithfulness and won't accept it. That doesn't do anything to the character of God at all.
Right.
Even if every person were to reject this gospel, God is still true if everyone were a liar. And to bolster that, he quotes from David in David's psalm of his confession of his sin, was sinned with Bathsheba. And in that psalm, he speaks about the God's justness and his rightness in the condemnation. So David is the we think Jesus is like the main Jew, right? We believe that about him. Well, they believe David is like the Jew. He's the Jew. And King David says, you are just, right? You are justified in your words and you prevail in your judgment. So if everyone that ever lived were to reject this gospel, God is still justified in his judgment. And you cannot question his faithfulness or his goodness or his integrity to the covenants. He's still true if everyone's a liar. That's the argument.
Right.
They say, well, what about, we don't have an advantage? And he says, no, you have a big advantage. You have the whole Old Testament, which demonstrates God's faithfulness, culminates in Christ. So whether you all reject it or not doesn't have anything to do with God's faithfulness. He's been faithful to you.
Right.
That's the argument.
Yeah.
And it does play into what we talked about earlier, kind of like off the cuff. I got a little fired up because, it did impact my kids. And I made the comment, if, Steve Lawson fell, if MacArthur fell, if every hero of the Christian faith, every preacher in our church, all the elders fell, God is still true and he's still faithful.
Right.
And has no impact whatsoever on the character of God. And that, if you really stop to think about it, it elevates God. The scriptures are always elevating to God to a place that is so far beyond us, right? Nothing we do can affect the character and nature of God. He'll still be worthy of worship if nobody worships him. He'll still be good. He'll still be just. He'll still be true. He'll still be faithful if every human that ever lived rejected the gospel.
Right.
We could never say, oh, you should have done it differently because then more people would have accepted the gospel. We can never make an accusation, but I think it does reveal that we are wicked and we want to accuse God and somehow bring him down from this place where his character is untouchable by us.
Yeah. Just thinking about Adam, as soon as he falls and God comes and, did you eat of the fruit? Eat of the tree I told you not to eat? And what does Adam say? The woman you gave to me.
Right.
Like there's nothing new under the sun. I mean, people are always wanting to point the finger away from themselves and try to make it seem as if God's unjust.
Right.
Like, I wouldn't have done this if you hadn't given me this woman.
Right. And that's the accusation. If your gospel is true, God's not faithful to his Old Testament covenant people. But there's more, and there's more than what we just talked about here. There's going to be Romans chapter 9, 10, and 11.
Right.
Which he'll list the other advantages, and then he'll talk about how God is not abandoned his people.
Mm.
He's still true to them, whether they're not true to him, doesn't matter, doesn't change. God is still true to them.
Yeah.
And whatever, it doesn't really even matter what your eschatology is, whether you're post mill, historic pre mill, or all mill. God doing a great work in the end of time for his people, which will happen the same way it happens for all Gentiles. There have been Gentile revivals and great awakenings all over the world through history.
Mm.
And I think what Romans is alluding to is that God will do that for his people.
Mm.
And there will be a large portion of them come to realize the truth of the gospel before the end.
Yeah, we can have disagreements on exactly how Romans chapter 11 is going to ultimately play out, but I think that what often gets lost in the debates is that shocking statement, all Israel will be saved.
Mm-hmm.
Now, whatever your view of how this happens or when it happens, the ultimate reality is all Israel will be saved.
Mm-hmm.
And that has to be informed by Romans 9,
Mm-hmm.
where he says not all Israel is Israel,
Mm-hmm.
but all of God's people will be saved. There will not be a single number of the elect
Right.
who won't be saved. And that's really where we should land, is this stunning revelation. Paul calls it a mystery, that all of God's people, all the people that he has chosen from eternity past, and he has sent Christ to die for, and he effectually calls and justifies, he will glorify them, and all of them will be saved.
Right.
And so his faithfulness will be magnified.
And there is a strange twist there in those chapters later in Romans, right? Because God will provoke them to jealousy through the Gentiles, is what he says.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, we don't think that is also a demonstration of God's faithfulness to his people.
Mm-hmm.
That's a demonstration that he is faithful to them, that he is using the Gentiles to provoke them to jealousy,
Right.
so that they can be ingrafted back in.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe they will be ingrafted back in. How that all is going to play out in history is a mystery to us, right? But it will be through the preaching of the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
I know that to be true.
Right.
How it all plays out will, someone will see. We
Yeah.
probably won't be us. We'll probably will be gone. But it could be. Christ could return whenever he is supposed to return. So, this is that idea.
Yeah.
Even though the Jews have been unfaithful, if they were faithful, they would have responded to Christ in the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't nullify the faithfulness of God.
Right.
By no means, he says. Absolutely not.
Right.
Yeah.
And this all centers on, like you said, the blessing or the privilege of proximity. They have the oracles of God, and so they can't say, God, why didn't you tell us?
Mm-hmm.
Like, why didn't you prepare us for the Messiah to come? They have the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm.
And to extend that to our congregation that is not Jewish is to again say, look, you have the privilege of proximity in an even greater way.
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking about this with the kids at lunch after the service, is, look, God has blessed you in a way that he doesn't bless other people. You didn't choose to be born to a Christian home. You could have been born to a Muslim family. You could have been born to a Philistine family, 1,000 years before Christ.
Mm.
You, because of God's blessing to you, apart from anything you've done, have been placed in a Christian home. And you hear the gospel daily, and you go to a good church where you hear the gospel, and you're surrounded by Christians, and you have more information than Abraham and Moses and David and even the Jews of Paul's day. You have the Old Testament and the New Testament. You've got all 66 books. And that's not a blessing that you should take for granted. Jesus in Matthew chapter 13, he tells the disciples, he says, "Blessed are your eyes, for they see, and your ears, for they hear. For truly I say to you, many prophets and righteous people long to see what you see and did not see it, and to hear what you hear and did not hear it."
Yeah.
And we, as people who are born in this time, in this area, with this kind of proximity to the oracles of God, greater judgment's going to fall on us.
Yeah.
If you hear the gospel at least weekly and you don't respond,
right,
you're going to be judged for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
In a way that someone who's on a, that island off of India, that they won't even let people, come ashore.
Yeah.
Like, they kill people before they come to shore. You who hear the gospel weekly in a church, in a Christian church, you're going to be judged more harshly than those people on that island that have never heard the gospel.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're, I think I made the statement in the sermon. You are the people sitting in this church, the most advantaged people that have ever lived in human history.
Yeah.
But we don't think about that. We don't think about that. We have, like you said, the New Testament, not just the New Testament. If you're hearing a preacher explain the New Testament and unfold to you the truth of the gospel in Christ, and then showing you the Old Testament and how he's the fulfillment of all that, you're literally the most advantaged people to ever live.
If you've got a phone that is playing this podcast right now, we're not the best preachers and teachers that have ever existed, but just because you have access to biblical teaching, you're more privileged than people for all of human history.
Yeah, you have a major advantage. So don't do what the Jews were doing at Paul's day. Listen, take advantage of the advantage that God gave you. Right? Yeah.
Yep. All right. So objection one is that if the gospel is true, as Paul is preaching it, then God's not faithful. But God is faithful. He's given them everything that they need to hear and understand and believe the gospel.
Yeah.
Right. The second objection: if Paul's gospel is true, then God is actually unjust to condemn sinners, and this is where it starts to get wild.
It really does.
These are some wild objections.
It really does, but there's so much revealing about human nature that goes on in these, and I've heard some wild objections to the gospel before, and I think if you ever, hopefully you've encountered them too, that means you're sharing the gospel with people, but you're going to hear all kinds of objections. Nothing new, and Paul definitely encountered them, and this is one that is pretty blasphemous, right? And but there is a logic to it. There's a logic to their objection, though I think that it's circular, because it creates a paradox, really, kind of what it does. But you can see it in verse 5 is where this objection comes up. It says, "But if our unrighteousness serves to show the righteousness of God, what shall we say? That God is unrighteous to inflict wrath on us?" So he's told them, right, like, you are, according to the law, which you cannot hope in, because the law condemns you, you're guilty before God. So their counter is, okay, but what about this, Paul, according to your gospel, which is that we're saved by grace alone and not by works, that God just is gracious to whom he will be gracious to, which, don't you find interesting? He told them that's who he was in the Old Testament, right? Be gracious to, I'll be gracious to. They say, well, our unrighteousness actually, if you think about it, Paul, it serves to magnify God's righteousness. Our unrighteousness shows that he's glorious in his righteousness. So then how can, in your gospel, God then condemn me as a sinner when all I've done in my sin is serve to magnify God's own glory and righteousness?
Right.
So then God's unjust to inflict wrath on the objects that are bringing him glory. That's the argument.
Yeah.
Which is wild.
It is.
Yeah.
You didn't bring it up, but it certainly is. And again, we can't avoid talking about Steve Lawson and the fallout from it, but this is certainly bringing reproach on Reformed theology.
Oh yeah,
and Calvinism, and this is one of the this is I mean, it sounds so similar. Well, didn't God predestine him to do this?
Yes. Yeah. I had a lot of
I've
examples.
seen a lot. I've seen
Yeah.
a lot of that.
Oh, I had more examples than what I put on
Yeah,
here.
yeah. But that's an objection that we hear.
Oh yeah.
Like, well, didn't God just predestine you to sin? Like, because He's glorified. I mean, I saw those comments. Like,
Mm-hmm.
isn't God glorified in this? That's the same thing that's going on here.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
So what do we do? How do we how do we answer this?
Well, first, I think we need to do to understand the things that we are encountering.
Mhm.
Like, I'm learning as I study Romans, right? I don't come to the book of Romans and just know everything about Romans. I don't know if people know that about preachers. That might come as a shock to them, right?
I thought you were an expert in it before you started.
Yeah, same thing with John. Like, whatever book you really dive into deeply and you try to see how everything's put together,
Mhm.
but he doesn't name what's going on. But I encountered this as I was reading through commentary. It's called a sophistry, right? And a sophistry, we need to understand, is a clever but fallacious, meaning wrong or false. It's a clever but false reasoning that sounds compelling and sounds like it could be true, but it's really the aim of it is to deceive or to mislead you to make a false conclusion about something. And so I tried to give some examples of ones that I know people have heard from our culture. And one of them that I thought about was Ukraine. So you may hear, and by the way, I'm just for the record, this doesn't say what, I'm not telling you I support Trump 100%, but I think he's right in this. And that he's not a madman and he doesn't want World War III. I can't say the same thing about everybody else that's running for office because there are war hawks and people that are just greedy and have a bloodlust for war in our government. It's insane. But if he makes a comment like, we ought to pursue diplomatic means for peace, like, maybe it's through applying different pressures upon Russia and even maybe Ukraine, who knows, to get them to stop, to bring a peaceful resolution to this because we don't want World War III, right? You'll hear a sophist argument from the other side. And it goes like this. Well, you don't support sending military aid to Ukraine. You don't support authorization of use of U.S. military weapons on Russian soil, because that's what's being argued right now.
Mm-hmm.
Then you're a puppet of Russia. You're pro-Putin. Like, are you a communist? Are you anti-American? Right? That's a sophist argument. Right, it's false because it sets up this dichotomy.
Yeah.
You're either for giving like weapons and military aid to Ukraine, or you're pro-Russian. Well, it could be just that I don't want there to be any war at all, and I want a peaceful resolution. I don't want something to suck us into World War III. So you hear that. You hear it with the abortion stuff all the time. This is probably the most popular one you'll ever hear is the abortion one. You're going to hear it from now until the end of the election, right? We say abortion ends a human life, and it is morally wrong to end a human life at any point of development of that human. So abortion is always wrong. This person over here will say, you don't really care about abortion. You only care about controlling women, because you don't want women to have a right to choose to do what she wants with her body.
Mm-hmm.
That's a sophist argument.
Yeah, they're really pulling it out because of that woman in Georgia that died.
Mm-hmm.
But what they don't tell you is that she died because she took an abortion pill, and the abortion pill killed her.
Right.
Yeah, but you don't care about women, Jay.
Yeah.
If you are against abortion, then you don't care about women.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. And you'll hear them about the gospel. You know, you're talking with the gospel with someone who's a skeptic, and you come to the resurrection, and which is the central tenet of our faith. No resurrection, no Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
And they say, well, we know resurrections don't happen. People don't come back from the dead. Scientifically impossible. Mm-hmm. Therefore, the resurrection's a myth, and everything else in Christianity is a myth.
Yeah.
Okay. That sounds reasonable and logical, but it also sets up it's a sophist type argument because it's ignoring the reality of what we're claiming, which is resurrections don't happen.
Right.
That's a central claim to Christianity.
Mm.
Resurrections do not happen. This resurrection happened as a sign to who Jesus actually was.
Right.
But it's a way to get out of the claim of the other. Again, said it usually, there always appeals to emotion, which there's appeals to emotion in this one that Paul's encountering. Appeals to emotion, false dichotomies. That's what you encounter.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I mean, people will do this type of thing. They'll say crazy things to escape realities.
Right.
So,
Right. But again, by no means.
yeah, he says by no means. Because if that's true, what you're saying, then God can't judge the world.
Mm-hmm.
So he brings this argument back to something he knows all Jews already agree with. They actually believe it with every fiber of their being,
Mm-hmm.
despite this ridiculous argument they're raising. They believe God's going to judge the world. And the world here means the Gentiles.
Right.
The world. Like
Mhm.
there's us, the home team. There's the world, all people that aren't Jews. And we already affirm God will judge the world because of their unrighteousness. So he says, by no means that's not true. Then how could God judge the world?
Right.
Even according to your own standard.
Mm-hmm.
So they know it's not true. It's absurd. It's an absurdity.
Right. And now you're going to have to walk us through this verse 7. You were wrestling with this one throughout the week.
Right.
So walk us through verse 7, and then we'll see if we can tie it all together.
Okay. So verse 7, many people and many commentators will say this is just a restatement of the first, of verse 5. Verse 5 is kind of more general and broad. Our unrighteousness magnifies God's righteousness, so he can't condemn us.
Mm-hmm.
Then now he just personalizes it. Say, if a person's lie serves to magnify the truthfulness of God, then how can God then condemn the liar as a sinner? And there is a logic to that, but it just, I don't know. There's something about it because of the personal pronoun that seems like something else is going on.
Yeah.
Because he says, if my lie,
Mm-hmm.
why does he change to the use of that pronoun?
Right. So
after digging around, I found Origin held the position that I'm about to tell you. Longnecker has a big fat commentary on Romans. Wouldn't say it's the most exciting in the world, but and then John Piper holds this position as well. And I think it just fits better. It makes more sense. So verse 7 then would be Paul using their own logic against them in really kind of a genius way.
Mm.
So then verse 7 would mean this. If my lie, so picture, again, he probably has encountered this as he is presenting the gospel in the synagogues. So he writes to the Roman church, knowing that Jews will hear this, and these type of objections come up in their mind. So if my lie serves that God's truth abounds to his glory, then why are you still condemning me as a sinner? So what is the lie? The lie would be that you cannot be justified by works of the law, that Jews and Gentiles are justified by faith in Christ the same way. So the lie that the Jews are condemning Paul of is the gospel. Paul, you are preaching a lie. And he says, okay, according to your own logic, my lie, the gospel, serves to magnify the truthfulness of God. Then how are you going to condemn me as a sinner?
Right.
And so he's got them trapped, because if they want to stick to that faulty logic, then they have to say, we don't condemn you as a sinner either.
Yeah, it's like there's no objective truth. Like
Right.
it's all subjective,
Right.
and it doesn't matter if you sin, because it glorifies God.
Yeah.
So you can't tell me that what I'm doing is wrong because it glorifies God.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That's it's interesting. That's
So
an interesting way in which he flips that.
I think it shows us that we may use the logic of the non-believer on them to show them the absurdity of where it goes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what he's done.
Yeah.
Is he showed them the absurdity of their logic.
So what you need to do when you are you're sharing the gospel with someone, you need to be paying attention to the logic of what they're objecting to, and don't be afraid to take it to its logical conclusion
Mm-hmm.
and show the absurdity of it.
Right.
Right.
Right. Yes. Yeah. It's something that you may do with an atheist who professes to be an atheist, though we know from Romans chapter 1 that they don't exist. They're suppress the truth and unrighteousness. I mean, you can show this. One easy way to do it is to ask that person, if I can answer every question and objection you have, will you today turn from your sin and submit your entire life to Christ, commit to living for Him for your whole life? 9 times out of 10, what I've encountered is they'll say no.
Yeah.
So you've just shown them they don't have a logic problem, a reasoning problem for this. They've got a moral problem, a moral objection that they don't want to submit to Christ.
Right.
So you can show them that. You can show them the logical end that, most atheists, they don't live according to their own worldview, because the logical conclusion is absolute meaninglessness, nihilism. And nothing matters, but they don't live that way. So you can kind of walk them through and show them that, how they are inconsistent with their own life. And I think we have examples like this. Paul is showing us that we are able to do this. And then he brings up another one that he just briefly touches on, and then just he doesn't really answer it. Well, he does answer it, but it's not the way maybe we would think. Another accusation that we see is that, well, if the gospel is true, we're saved by grace alone, then we should just sin, and that'll glorify God because He's glorified in giving grace to sinners. So let us do evil that good may come. The good that would come would be God glorifying Himself and giving grace. And he'll deal with this later in Romans. He doesn't really even dive into it. He just answers it with this statement. He says, as some slanderously charge us with saying, it's a slander. The gospel doesn't say that.
Right.
And we know it doesn't because of chapter 2, he's already said your entire life's going to be taken into account. Did you obey the gospel or not? Did you persevere in good works? If no, you will be judged, right? But they're saying it's a slander. Christians say we can just sin and do whatever we want because God will forgive us anyway. But there are people that believe that today, which they're not believers.
Yeah.
But he just said his answer is their condemnation is just, and he just leaves it there.
Yeah.
He just ends it like you believe this, you're condemned, and he just ends it.
Which I think that we are uncomfortable doing that.
Yeah.
In our own encounters, we don't want to just say, you know what, I'm not going to talk to you about it anymore.
Yeah.
Like I think that we feel like that is maybe ungracious,
right?
Or we're probably caught up in the judgmental, like that like how is that going to look? But I think that it's true. Like you don't have to sit and debate with someone for hours.
Yeah.
Like there comes a point where this person is obviously, they just don't want to believe.
Right.
We've had these conversations with our kids just over the last week. Not about so much the gospel, but just giving excuses. What I had this absurd discussion with my 5-year-old a couple of days ago. He didn't want to eat the food that was on his plate. Why not? Well, it's too mushy. Well, 2 minutes later, it's too crunchy. Like, well,
and then it's cold.
Yeah, like just say you don't want it. Like, stop making these excuses. But that's I mean, it's the same. That's the same like experience that you're going to have with unbelievers when you're trying to tell them the gospel. Like, just understand that all of these excuses are they're just smoke. Right. It's just a distraction to get away from them just saying, I don't want to believe it.
Right.
I don't want to believe this. I don't want to submit to the authority of Christ.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I like what you said. When you don't want to do something, one excuse is as good as another.
Yeah. That's what it is. Yeah. And so he leaves them with that. And I think we should get over our fear of that. What if us saying to someone, I've told you the gospel and you've understood it mentally. You have all these objections for reasons you don't want to do it. And then you leave them with, you're condemned.
Yeah.
Thanks for talking to me, but you're condemned, and I don't want you to be. And you leave. It could be that is the thing that sticks in their head. I'm under the condemnation of God.
Yeah.
And it might just stick with them and hang with them enough to where it will cause them to remember the gospel and hopefully, believe it.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we don't have to be jerks about it.
Right.
But you don't have to continue talking to them.
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus even says you don't throw your pearls before swine.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
There comes a point where unbelief is, they're just so stuck in their unbelief.
Yeah.
That nothing that you say
man.
is going to do anything.
Yeah. Yeah. I gave that illustration of the guy I talked to.
It was a good one. It was a good one, Jay.
Yeah. So we go in our neighborhood around our church, and I've got one other guy with me, and so we get the door slammed in our face all the time. Well, this guy lets us in. He's really friendly, and so I go in there, and we're in there for probably like an hour and a half, 2 hours, and this guy's just ripping through a pack of cigarettes while we're talking. Man, it's wild, but he's friendly. And so we have this exchange, and he's got all these objections, and so I do my best to answer them. I think answered them sufficiently, and we get to the end where, like, because the gospel calls for a response, so you got to get people to where, like, hey, you've got to respond to this. And he takes a big rip off of that sucker and blows out a big thing of smoke, and he's like, you forgot one thing. You're not considering one thing. I'm like, what's that? He's like, and it's almost like crazy-eyed Matthew McConaughey.
Yeah.
You forgot one thing, man. One thing, man, you're not considering. Jesus, he might be an alien. That's what he said. I was like, what? I was like, all right, we're done. I said, we're done here. We're done now. And that other just said, you just don't want to believe.
Yeah.
So thanks for wasting 2 hours of my life.
Yeah.
Could have started with that. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think that some people would want to sit there and like try to argue with him.
Yeah.
Instead of just saying, like, you obviously don't want to believe what the scriptures say. You don't want to believe what the message is.
Yeah.
You do not have to feel the pressure of sitting there trying to convince some guy that Jesus was not an alien. Right.
Right. Yeah.
And that's true with a bunch of different people. It doesn't have to be that level of absurdity, but you don't have to feel the burden of answering every single objection that someone has to the gospel, because the objections are endless.
Oh yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. There's plenty of evidence. I had that little chat with ChatGPT, and my whole goal of that was to show people don't object because there's not enough evidence,
right.
And they don't object because this isn't logical, and it isn't based on reason, right? There's something else going on. There's a moral objection here in the human heart, that does not want to surrender their self to God. So, yeah. And so he answers these objections, I think, sufficiently. God's not faithful to his people, and he's like, nope, completely wrong. God is faithful if every man is a liar and doesn't believe this. Second one, the ridiculous, absurd objection, which is wild. And he answers it finally with saying this, your condemnation is just.
Yeah.
That's where he leaves it. And so that's kind of answering the objection section. And next week, we begin the closing arguments. So if this is a courtroom, we're getting closing arguments, and we're going to get some really, like, powerful closing arguments from Paul. It's going to come in two parts. There's going to be a universal indictment that's like, the hammer, dropping the hammer down. We call it total depravity. That's the theological word. But he's going to show the end result of this is universal condemnation. Second part of that is to bring forth the gospel and to make the gospel shine brightly as the only hope for humans' condemnation, all of humanity.
Okay. All right. So 9 through 20 next week?
Yeah.
Is that right? Okay. All right. Well, a little sobering at the beginning.
Yeah. For sure.
Hopefully it's helpful, and hopefully this conversation with Romans 3:1-8 has been helpful also. All right. Well, thank you for joining us today for this text-driven Tuesday. We hope that this has been beneficial for you. Please make sure to like, subscribe, and share. Feel free to drop a comment under the video, and hopefully you have a good week. We'll see you next time. God bless.
There you go. All right.
Your phone's blowing up over there.